Hi, this is Jeff Hastings, professor of psychology. Today we're going to talk about chapter 2, which is about brain and behavior. So let's get started. Just a few things to consider before we get started. Do you know someone who's either had a concussion or more than one? What are the long-term ramifications for repeated concussions and other brain injuries? Do you feel the opportunity to play a professional sport is actually worth the chance of sustaining such an injury? Why or why not? These are kind of some of the things I want you to think about when we go through this chapter about the brain and neurons and how our body not only views or interprets that information and how that interpretation affects our human behavior. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to outline major divisions of the nervous system, understand what a neuron is and how the important parts of that neuron, and how they operate to communicate with each other and also to communicate with our body and to cause reactions within our body. And distinguish between neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. You're going to understand different methods scientists use to understand the structures of the brain, identify different methods scientists use to understand the function of brain structures, a little bit about the left and right hemisphere, the cerebral cortex, and also the different lobes of the cerebral cortex and describe each one of their functions. So you're going to see we're going to cover a lot of information in a very short period of time. So what I'd like to start with is a quick video on the human brain and how this all works.
Welcome students to Chapter 2, Unraveling the Mysteries of the Brain and Behavior. Today, we're about to embark on an exhilarating odyssey through the mesmerizing labyrinth of your brain. As we journey together, prepare to witness the awe-inspiring architecture of the brain unfold before your eyes, uncover its enigmatic functions, and behold the astounding influence it wields over our behavior. From the electrifying dance of the smallest neuron to the breathtaking symphony of our grandest thoughts, our brain stands as the majestic epicenter of it all. So, sit back, grab a pen and paper, and get ready to plunge into the captivating world of the brain, where its profound impact on behavior will leave you utterly spellbound. Let's dive in and discover the wonders that make us who we are. The brain, a complex organ, is the command center for the human nervous system. It's made up of several distinct parts, each playing a crucial role in our daily lives. There's the cerebrum, the largest part of the brain, which is involved in higher brain functions such as thinking, learning, and consciousness. Next, we have the cerebellum, situated at the back of the brain. It's responsible for motor control, balance, and coordination. And then there's the brainstem, the brain's lifeline, controlling automatic functions vital for survival such as heart rate and breathing. But the brain isn't just a static organ, it's dynamic, constantly changing and adapting. This is due to a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. This allows us to learn new skills, recover from injuries, and adapt to new environments. Understanding the brain's structure and functions is the first step in comprehending its influence on behavior. The brain isn't just an organ, it's the orchestrator of our behavior. It's a symphony of interconnected parts, each playing a vital role in shaping our actions, emotions, and thoughts. At the heart of this orchestra are the neurotransmitters, the brain's very own chemical messengers. These tiny powerhouses transmit signals throughout the brain, creating a complex web of communication that directly impacts our behavior. They are the conductors of our mood, sleep, concentration, and a myriad of other behaviors. Picture a concert without a conductor where every musician plays their own tune. The result would be chaos and confusion, causing increased stress and anxiety. Similarly, if neurotransmitters are out of balance, our behavior can also become erratic. Mood swings, sleep disorders, and concentration issues are often the results of such imbalances. So next time you ask yourself why you're feeling a certain way, remember, it's your brain's neurotransmitters pulling the strings. Indeed, our behavior is a reflection of the complex interplay of systems within our brain. This concludes our summary and exploration of Chapter 2, Brain and Behavior. We've navigated the complex labyrinth of the brain and uncovered the intimate dance between our neurons and our behaviors. Your curiosity and eagerness to learn make this journey all the more rewarding. Students, remember to subscribe to the channel and continue this exciting academic adventure with us. In our next video, we'll delve into the captivating world of human development. The journey has just begun. Thank you for joining in today's study. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more engaging content. Next up, we dive into the fascinating journey of human development to better understand the forces that shape us. Is it nature or nurture that defines our personality? Stay tuned and keep watching to find out more.
So let's start with the nervous system. You know, there's two basic parts of the nervous system that you'll find out, the central and the peripheral. And really, when you think, what's the meaning of peripheral? It's something that is secondary or it's not primary, like your peripheral vision. You know, you've got your main vision, and the peripheral vision is the stuff that's outside of that main part. And it's the same thing with the nervous system. We have a central nervous system and we have a peripheral nervous system. So think about it kind of as secondary. And what we'll do now is kind of look at, you see the picture, you probably can't see all the little boxes, but we're going to go into each one of those to explain what they actually do and their impact on the nervous system. You know, when we talk about neurons, they're kind of the information messengers. They use electric and chemical signals. They send information between different areas of our brain, as well as between the brain, the left and right hemispheres, the spinal cord, and actually the entire body. So nerves are a bundle of fibers that receives and sends messages between the body and the brain. So the messages are sent, there's chemical, but there's also electrical charges in the cells that make up the nerves. And the cranial nerves are basically a set of 12 paired nerves, and they're in the back of your brain. And cranial nerves send the electrical signals between your brain, face, neck, but they don't go through your spinal cord. And that's why people with spinal injuries actually still have different movements they can make, because that cranial nerve helps you taste, smell, hear, feel sensations. And they also, of course, help you make facial expressions like, or blink your eyes, move your tongue, things like that. And there's something called a vagus nerve you may have heard about. And that's why it's not directly affected by the spinal cord injury, is basically that vagus nerve is outside of that the spinal cord, and they branch out separately into different parts of the brain. So then we talk about somatic nervous system. It's actually a subdivision of your peripheral nervous system that stretches throughout every part of your body. And the nerves in this system deliver information from senses to your brain. They also carry commands from your brain to the muscles so you can move around. The autonomic nervous system is a component of the peripheral nervous system that regulates involuntary physical processes like your heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, you know, digestion, and even sexual arousal. But that ANS, it's called ANS, the autonomic nervous system, you know, the neurons are carrying the information to and from internal organs and glands. And there are three distinct divisions. That's where the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric system actually lies. And there also, I just put that last part in there to remind me that to tell you that there is a week 2 summary for more details. It really gets more in depth on that part of it that I encourage you to watch. So the different parts of the peripheral nervous system, we've got the sympathetic nervous system. You'll see there it's relating, or it says relating to or denoting the part of the autonomic nervous system consisting of nerves arising from ganglia near the middle part of the spinal cord, supplying the internal organs, blood vessels, glands, and balancing the actions of the parasympathetic nerves. And the important part to know there is the autonomic nervous system carries information from the internal organs and glands. I think that was part of the test question there. And also then you have the sympathetic, then you have the parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic, it's really a counterbalance. It says the action of the sympathetic nerves. It consists of nerves arising from the brain and lower end of the spinal cord, supplying internal organs, blood vessels, and glands, and it quiets the body. So when we get into the sympathetic nervous system, realize, and you look at it there, that's more of that fight or flight response. It's automatic. And what happens when that is triggered in your nervous system, then your body is in a state of arousal. It's heightened arousal. So you have in the list there, you can see in red, increased alertness, dilated pupils, increased breathing, accelerated heart rate, inhibited digestion, increased muscle tone. What it's getting you prepared for is that fight or flight because of the risk of danger or being hurt. So these are very quick triggers. They put your body on full alert, where when you go to the parasympathetic, that actually relaxes your body and your system to prepare for rebuilding, conserving energy, and storing that energy. You'll learn about here in a few slides, how we store that energy to be available when we need it the most. So let's look at neurons. They have four basic parts. We'll talk about dendrites, the soma, the cell body, axon, axon terminals. We're not going to get into every single thing like that, every definition, because this video would be about 4 hours, but I just want you to make sure to go through the material, read the book, so you can get some of those questions answered, because there are some questions that, since everyone receives different questions on the quiz, that may be on there, so you need to make sure to read that material as well. But how do neurons work? Here's a picture of a neuron. They're electrically charged molecules, or ions, found in and outside each neuron. Some have positive, others have negative charges. When a neuron is inactive, more positive charges exist outside of the neuron and more negative charges exist inside. Just kind of a simple little fact there for you. And there's a myelin sheath. It's a material that coats the axons to help neurons move rapidly down the axon. And there's a channel, functions like tiny gate for the membrane. So whenever your brain triggers these responses and it releases these neurons that are triggered to go to a certain part of your body to help you move or become more aware, to prepare for what's about to happen. That's kind of, each one of these neurons have a different part and a different potential of each one of them. So of course there's neurotransmitters, and these are indigenous chemicals. They allow neurons to kind of communicate with each other and talk throughout our body, and they enable the brain to provide a variety of functions through processes of chemical synaptic transmission. These chemicals are an integral part of shaping everyday life and functions. So there's a difference between, if you look at a neurotransmitter and a neuropeptide. A neurotransmitter is a short-term quick response. And a neuropeptide, that is actually producing kind of a prolonged action, things that are going to be more long-term. And that neuropeptide, they influence behavior, emotional reactions, but also they can be negative in that they also can create behavioral disorders like depression, anxiety, things like that can be long-term. If your state of awareness, for instance, like if you have a flight or fight response to a potential stress or a danger, what your body does is it kicks it into high gear, and then of course your body, then you've got your parasympathetic and then sympathetic nervous system that relaxes that system back down to your baseline, to the normal. But if you're constantly on that state of high awareness and it doesn't go back down, then it's going to create that anxiety, and too much of that anxiety and stress can lead to depression. And that's what that neuropeptide, so there's a transmitter, but the peptide actually exists more long-term. And there are different types of neuropeptides, not to get too down, but you see the definitions on the screen. Encephalin, a naturally occurring peptide, is potential for like pain-killing effects. It's released by neurons through the central nervous system and by cells through the adrenal medulla, if you want to know that. But also endorphins, you see it there having kind of a opiate quantities that are qualities that occur in the brain and spinal cord that are really painkillers. So they're naturally occurring painkillers. So when we talk about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, neuroplasticity is the capacity of a nervous system, your brain, to actually change in response to experience, to grow. And you're going to see here in a minute, our brain actually, as we age, gets smaller, it shrinks. But that plasticity is when you learn something new, that your brain is considered to be, shaping and always constantly moving. Matter of fact, adults lose about 50,000 neurons a day. When you're 70 years of old, I think about 10% of your brain actually size from when it was at its largest. You lose about 10%, so you can throw any jokes around there, someone that's almost 60. But fortunately, you have, I think we start on average about 86 billion neurons or cells in the human brain. So, if you're going to count to a billion, it's 32 years to count to a billion. I don't know who counts these things, but if you take 32, 86 billion, you're looking at 2,750 years that would probably take you, give or take a few years, to actually reach 86 billion neurons. I'm not sure how they actually count it, but I think it's just kind of an average. Very interesting. But neurogenesis is production of new brain cells as they die. And new cells link up to other cells involved in learning, memory, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. You actually see that there's some studies of these nuns. I forgot exactly where they're at, in Italy or somewhere, of course. And they have a very, very low rate, of almost like zero. We talk about mental capacity when you lose it, when you get older and you have different type of problems neurologically, that they have no, you look at Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, things like that. None of them had Alzheimer's, and they wanted to find out why, what made them so different. And it was because every year as a group, they learned to do something new. So it really went into that study of how you can, if you continue to learn new things and force yourself to do it, to enroll in, courses, even when you get to be older, that it helps improve that neuroplasticity and the growth of your brain. So just a little tidbit of information. So just a quick knowledge check. I'm not going to go through this specifically, but just look at each one of these definitions, these neurotransmitters, and what part of function in the brain does it actually relate to. We're going to talk a lot more about this in future classes. Talk about like from dopamine. We didn't talk about dopamine yet, and glutamate, but dopamine and norepinephrine we'll talk about here in a moment. But that dopamine, and let's go ahead and go to the answers here. So we can look at dopamine, participates in motivational reward planning of behavior. It is known as a feel-good, neuron, or you're looking at this, with dopamine when it transmits in your body. But the problem is it does motivate you, and it is a reward. It's a feel-good, it's that feel-good part of your body and your senses. But the problem is that you want it, and it creates this addictive behavior because you're always craving or wanting that feeling, that dopamine release, and that reward. And the problem is there's only so much your brain is going to create, and when it stops creating it, or it's not regenerating fast enough because you're constantly going through, let's say, social media or gambling or gaming that gives you that feel good, then if your body doesn't have enough time, your brain doesn't have enough time to store it and reproduce it, then that does lead to depression and other type of negative consequences. We'll talk more about that later. So here are just different neurotransmitters of function in the brain that you may want to become aware of. So here's a question. It could be on the quiz. Which of the following best describes the function of the autonomic nervous system? So look at those for a moment. Think if you know the answer. Autonomic nervous system. It carries information to and from internal organs and glands. That's the primary function of that system. Which of the following accurately characterizes the executive function of the brain? And some of these questions we're going to go through, we may not talk about here in this video or these videos, but they are in your book. So you want to make sure to read your book, and also there are supplemental videos that I make to cover some of these questions as well. So which of the following accurately characterizes the executive function of the brain? A process that allows us to regulate and coordinate our own internal thought process. That's a really important thing. And there's executive disorder, function disorder, ADHD, that is part of it, with that executive function disorder, that has a hard time focusing and regulating our own thought process because they're so scattered, thinking about too many things. I have severe ADHD, so I try to film these videos in the morning if I can. So which of the following is the most appropriate definition of parasympathetic nervous system? So look at those for a moment. The division of the autonomic nervous system, ANS, that quiets the body and conserves energy. So you have the sympathetic, that's that response, that trigger, fight or flight. Parasympathetic, it quiets your body and it conserves energy. And that's why when you do have a fight or flight response, and it doesn't mean that a tiger is about to eat you, that, of course could happen, but it's more of this danger, hurt from being hurt in a relationship, or hurt, by another person in an argument, or whatever the case may be. And you have that gives you that heightened awareness. And afterwards, that's why you're so tired. That parasympathetic nervous response, or that system, tries to calm you down, but it's conserving energy because there's only so much of all those the transmitters that transmit the neurons to the right parts of your body to your system has to recover and restore, and that parasympathetic nervous system actually is that restoration of those, so you do have more available if another fight or flight response were to happen again. So but you do need recovery time for that to happen. So let's go into brain research a little bit. And you've heard about maybe CT scans. You may have had one done. It's just an X-ray image of your brain. You see one there. But one real, that most places, if you go in, you have a concussion or something else, they may also do an MRI. And it's a three-dimensional image is produced in that MRI. And there's also a functional MRI, fMRI, that is even more involved. But that MRI just looks at that brain to see if it, and of course with a lot of concussions or brain injuries, you can't actually see them very well on these at all. You really don't know what that damage would be. You may be able to, you can see clots and other type of things that happen that could result from a brain injury. But the concussion itself, until you die and they cut open your brain and they want to look at it, they can at that point see where all that damage. But to this point today, even though they're trying to advance that technology, they can't actually tell the extent to different type of concussions and things like that. So we have the EEG, you can read about that, the PET scan, there's the fMRI, and that fMRI, I say that really advancing, it shows whether a person is lying. It shows what that stress response is, and really it's looking at your body's reaction to certain questions. You have your normal heart rate, and you know with that flight or fight response that is triggered, it is automatic, and it's something most people can't control. Your heart rate starts beating faster, your pupils dilate. You remember those kind of responses for your parasympathetic nervous system. And that fMRI combined with these sensors really is what a lie detector is. But the fMRI is really the brain to see how that brain is working. And of course, a lot of people says you can see whether or not someone's lying. So the lie activation, different parts of your brain that are trying to control your emotional responses. So that's if someone could control their body responses. They're not picked up on a lie detector, the fMRI may be able to see what's actually their thought process is, to see what they're thinking. Very scary. So here's just a knowledge check activity. Janelle's doctor wants to study the changes in her brain while she's asleep and compare it to other states. What type of process? What are they going to use for that? Of course, that would be an EEG, which would study that and look at these different signals. So you can read about that and understand why, but those could be test questions. Now we're going to go into the cerebral cortex of the brain. And you've always heard about left brain, right brain, things like that. We'll talk about it, even though there is some new research that really doesn't mean someone's just left-brained or right-brained, but it is, true that different hemispheres of your brain controlled by the left or right side do control certain activities. But it doesn't mean if you're left-handed, you're only right. That is not really the truth. But we're going to look at your cerebral cortex. Of course, there are two different left and right hemisphere, and they're connected by these axon fibers called corpus callosum. And there's lateralization, specialization in the abilities of the left and right hemisphere. So we won't get into that too much now, but we will talk more about it when we get into learning and memory and things like that. The lateralization is one hemisphere controls physical movement of the opposite side of the body. The left hemisphere, that's analytical side, about 95% of it's used for language, math, judging, time, rhythm, small complex movements. Right hemisphere, they talk about worldview, sees the big picture, perceptual type skills, and you can kind of see the diagram there on the screen. Split brain operation. Some tasks make more use of one hemisphere or the other, and most real-world activities, though, both of them are sharing the work. They're both left and right, and it's your brain as they ask questions and you're processing different type of, from math problems or different type of, from nonverbal, verbal, and and most of the time the left and right hemisphere are working in conjunction. Not always the play, it's not always the case, especially you look at aphasia, some other type of disorders of the brain that are in the book. I really recommend you read those in the book. There are a few questions on the quiz that we're not going to cover here, but that talk about some of these problems with the inability to do the left or see the right side of the brain with severe brain injuries. There's a lot of research that's done where just one side of the brain is damaged or almost gone. And that's where they really see the other side of the brain, what it controls and what that person would lose. So there's, gosh, what is the book called? The man who mistook his wife for a hat. And you hear about Bruce Willis, and there was another actor that was diagnosed with aphasia recently. I can't remember who it was, but you know, that's a really interesting phenomenon, but where part of the brain is, you know, that actually transmits the data to be able to understand and make sense of what you're seeing if it's not connecting and you're forgetting what is what. It's very, very interesting research. So, and sometimes hemispheric dominance, people have, you know, if they're left-handed, right-handed, I don't want to talk about that. I hope there are no questions on the quiz. I need to go back and look at it. But if there are, in the book, it teaches 70% of left-handers process speech in the same manner as right-handed. Well, that's actually updated. Mixed dominance is common. Okay, so this is actually updated. I thought it wasn't, because a lot of old research would talk about dominance, and if you're left-handed, this is what it means. If you're right-handed, and that's actually been proven to be inaccurate. So it looks like that the you know, Kuhn and the Cengage Publishing actually did update this. This is very recent. Lobes of the cerebral cortex, frontal lobe, your different lobes. Just read a little bit about that, and we'll go into some of that here in a moment. But the prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive function. Do you remember what those executive function, the reasoning, higher level mental processes allow for regulation and coordination of thought processes. Association areas combine and process information. So just read that in there. Is a little bit about aphasia, including Broca's area, which causes motor expressive aphasia. Grammar, pronunciation, you know, those are just extra. If you would like to know more about that, that's in your book, and I highly recommend reading it. It's very interesting, but I'm not going to get into it too much now. But the primary motor area directs body's muscles, control movements, and there are mirror neurons that are active when we perform an action and observing others doing the same action. It's just a mirrored effect, mirrored neurons. And the different parts of the lobe, parietal lobes, temporal and occipital. Of course, you know what occipital means, and the visual cortex. You know, if they have visual agnosia, you know, facial, if they can't recognize facial expressions, things like that, or identify a person by face, you know, and then so you can read about that. Not going to get into it too much. So the left and right sides of the cerebral cortex are connected by what structure? Remember what I said there? Starts with a C, and the second word also starts with a C. Corpus callosum. What's the difference between the endocrine system? This is an interesting question that I added. I want you to understand there are two different systems, your endocrine and your nervous system. Very important to understand kind of the difference between the two of these. And really, the endocrine system is uses chemicals like hormones. It's produced by glandular, while the nervous system, and of course nerves, you think of electrical signaling like neural impulses, are more electrical. So think of endocrine, chemical. It's hormones, secreting of hormones. So your nervous system, the neuron is a specialized cell that communicates information throughout the body to carry out its purpose. So that's the nervous system. Where your endocrine system is a specialized gland known as endocrine glands that produce hormones directly into the blood as chemical messengers. That's what will affect more your gut and other type of things that you're not, and these are connected, but they're different. So there are different ways of signaling. The brain signals this down to, you know, to fight infections, to process food, to sexual arousal, from, you know, fight or flight response. Some are neurological, and some are part of your endocrine system. So it's kind of important to differentiate between the two of those. So which part of the brain is responsible for controlling the dexterity of our hands, such as our ability to hold a pencil or play a musical instrument? I would think that's kind of easy. That's going to be the frontal lobe. Yep, the frontal lobe. And it directs body muscles and things like that. So let's talk about subcortex and endocrine system in more detail. So your cerebrum it's the largest area of your brain. I know it may be hard to see on the screen, but I'll just talk about each one of those to give you a better idea of what part of that brain and what it does. So your cerebral cortex, we talk about it. It's the outer layer that it's on top of the cerebrum that controls consciousness and like your movements. It controls learning, memories, emotion, all of that. That's your cerebral cortex. Then we have the hypothalamus. It's the area of the brain that produces hormones that actually control your body temperature, heart rate, hunger, mood, things like that. And then we've got your pituitary gland. And the main function is to produce hormones that carry out important bodily functions like growth. Metabolism is actually part of the whole system, but how your body transforms, manages energy from the food we ate, the metabolism. But also the pituitary gland influences reproduction as well. The medulla oblongata plays a critical role in transforming signals between your spinal cord and higher parts of the brain and controlling autonomic activities such as heartbeat, respiration, things that we don't have to think about that just happen. That's your medulla oblongata. Then we go back to the corpus callosum we talked about here a moment ago, and it's a conduit that allows information from one side of the brain. Remember, it's right down the middle. It connects the two of your cerebral cortex. But that callosum, that transmit from left to right side, so they need to be firing together to be able to really take data in, interpret it, and then have this correct response. And thalamus, it's your body's, think of that like a relay station. All the information from our senses, except for smell, all the other senses though, are processed through your thalamus before it's sent to your cerebral cortex, where your cerebral cortex actually interprets that data. The thalamus also, it helps us, it determines our brain's activity in sleep or wakefulness. It's the difference between consciousness, but also the thalamus is responsible for a big part of learning and how you store information or memory. In the hypothalamus, you heard about the thalamus, but the hypothalamus, that's actually just what controls the gland. So it's part of it. And then we have the midbrain. The midbrain is like a switch center. It serves like motor movement, specifically in your eye, auditory and visual is the midbrain. It's a switch for the auditory and visual learning. So that's a big part too, when you realize, are you an auditory, are you a visual learner, so the different main learning, or you're a kinesthetic learner, where you have to put your hands on and experience something to learn. It's really important that you pay attention to that, especially as we go through this course, to see, are you learning more by hearing? Are you learning more by seeing, like the video? It may be a combination of the both. And the way you find out is without looking at the video, just listen and picture it in your own mind. So the first thing, watch the video and pay attention to it. Then after that, turn on the video and just listen to it and see if it's making more sense. Most people are auditory. They think they're visual, but they're really not. It's hearing it. And sometimes when you're watching it, especially if you've got ADHD or some other type of attention deficit disorder, or you have a hard time focusing, when you're watching the video, you may see it, but you're not hearing it. You're not focused on the right thing. So if you close your eyes and turn off the visual, then you can actually experience what you're trying to learn and hear it, which makes you think of the visual and tries to visualize it, which actually, for most people, that's the way you learn. And that's an important thing as you're going through these courses, you take additional courses, or throughout your life, is to understand, how are you processing? How is your brain processing this information? I find it very interesting, and you may as well. So we talk about cerebellum, muscle control. Cerebellum controls like movement, balance, things like that. It also has other cognitive functions, language processing, memory, also part of memory. And then we have reticular formation. That's really sleep and consciousness. It has projections to the thalamus, the cerebral cortex, and it allows it to have control over which sensory signals to send. So that will make sure our attention, our conscious attention, is focused. That's what that reticular formation is make sure, when we are conscious, that we're processing information a certain way, and that we focus on the important things. And of course, the spinal cord, and kind of define that because I believe in the next slides that we're going to talk about that. Of course, it's the structure. You know what your spinal cord is. It's made up of nerve tissues, and it goes from your medulla oblongata all the way back to your lumbar region of your back, and it controls reflexes, movement, things like that. So here's a quick video on how your spinal cord attaches to all of this, just to kind of understand that.
The spinal cord is a very important part of our central nervous system, the overall system that controls and coordinates the activities of our bodies.
Our brain is surrounded by the skull, while our spinal cord is surrounded by rings of bone called vertebrae, and both are covered by a protective membrane. Together, the vertebrae and membrane make up our spinal column, or our backbones. The backbone, which protects our spinal cord, starts at the base of our skull and ends just above our hips. The spinal cord is about 18 inches long and extends from the base of the brain down the middle of the back to just below the last rib in the waist area. The main job of the spinal cord is to be the communication system between the brain and the body by carrying messages that allow us to move and feel sensation. Our spinal nerve cells, called neurons, carry the messages to and from the spinal cord. These messages leave the spinal cord through openings in the vertebrae. Spinal nerve roots branch off the spinal cord in pairs, one going to each side of the body. Each nerve has a specific job for movement and feeling. They tell the muscles in your arms, hands, fingers, legs, toes, chest, and other parts of your body when and how to move. When a spinal cord injury occurs, sensation and movement may be interrupted, resulting in a temporary or permanent loss of function and paralysis. In general, the higher on the spinal cord the injury occurs, the greater loss of function the person may experience. The vertebrae are grouped into sections according to their location. For example, the 7 vertebrae in the neck are called the cervical vertebrae. The vertebrae are numbered top to bottom from the head to the tailbone. The top vertebrae is called C1, the next is C2, C3, and so on. Cervical spinal cord injuries usually cause loss of function in the arms and legs, resulting in tetraplegia, which is also called quadriplegia. The next 12 vertebrae are called the thoracic vertebrae. The first, T1, is where the top rib attaches. Injuries in the thoracic region usually affect the trunk and legs and result in paraplegia. The lumbar vertebrae are the 5 vertebrae in the lower back between the thoracic vertebrae, where the ribs attach, and the pelvis, or hip bone. The sacral vertebrae run from the pelvis to the end of the spinal column. Injuries to the 5 lumbar vertebrae, L1 through L5, and similarly to the 5 sacral vertebrae, S1 through S5, generally result in some loss of functioning in the hips and legs.
So you also look at these and wonder, wow, am I taking a class in psychology? How is this so important? When we talk about psychology, really what we're looking at, we have to understand first is how the brain transmits what we see, what our environment is, and of course when we get into it in the next chapter, we'll talk about environment versus biology, or inherited traits or attributes, what we're born with versus our environment, what affects our psychology or our reaction to that environment more. But a big part of it, even though most of it is, you'll find out, environment, our brain and how we process that information really comes from different parts from stored memories and our subconscious. We have conscious memories. We'll talk about all of that and how our brain is interpreting, because that interpretation of our environment becomes our reality. And when we get into psychology, or you want to understand why you do the things you do, or why someone else, a friend, or if you become a psychologist or a client, why they actually are behaving in a certain way or making decisions in a certain way that are leading to these bad outcomes, what really is the reason for that? And understanding the function, the neurological, the brain function, how that is interpreting data becomes very, very important. And also I find it very interesting too. So that's why we're kind of talking about this a little bit. But when we get into it, let's talk about the forebrain. It plays a central role in the processing of information related to complex cognitive activities. Cognitive meaning our brain power when we're thinking and we're processing data. So, sensory, associative functions, voluntary movement, or motor activities. It represents one of three majors. The forebrain is three major development divisions of our brain. And the other two are the midbrain and the hindbrain, so the hindbrain. So we have the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. So just different parts of that brain. So the hindbrain, we're going to go from forebrain to hindbrain, and then we'll talk about midbrain. But hindbrain is the most primitive part of our brain. That's our medulla. Connects the brain with the spinal cord, controls vital life functions, pons that bridge the medulla and other areas of the brain, reticular formation, talked about that a little bit, the collection of cells and fibers in the medulla and pons, and we already talked about that. Cerebellum, near the base of the brain, regulates posture, muscle tone, muscular coordination, and that's part of the hindbrain. And then the midbrain, and it connects, of course, the forebrain and the hindbrain, but it also makes up the brain stem, the midbrain. And it's the thickening of spinal cord where it joins the brain. Virtually all communication between cerebral cortex and the rest of the body passes through the brain stem and goes, of course, through that midbrain. So when we look at the brain, we talk about, too, there's part of it, the limbic system. And it's part of our brain involved in behavioral and emotional responses. Now we're getting into psychology. So we're talking about the limbic system, and that is fight or flight. When we talk about that, we talk about it a lot because it's about survival. That's the limbic system. It's for feeding, reproduction, caring for our young, fight or flight response. That's the limbic system in part of that part of the brain. And it's made up of your hypothalamus, parts of the thalamus, amygdala. That amygdala is really the control center and hippocampus for fight or flight response. So where your hippocampus is storing those memories and telling you this is bad, this is fear, run from this. When this happened last time, this is what happened to you. So you better find a way, create this defense response, this mechanism to prevent yourself from getting hurt. And your amygdala is what triggers that response. And there's a great professor just passed away. He talked about amygdala and the amygdala, what do you call amygdala hijack, I believe we call it, Mark Goldstone out of UCLA. And he just talks about when your body takes over, and a lot of you hear about, the best way to example is think about a roid rage, someone taking too much artificial testosterone. Our body has naturally, of course, produces testosterone more in men than women, or male versus female. But when we have too much of it, it can create, and you've heard about this, it creates this roid rage, where someone is, that's what an amygdala hijack is. It's where your amygdala is angry. It really produces that fear, that fight or flight, and that's where it's triggered, where you can't control it, that rage factor. So then we have the endocrine system. So the endocrine glands, it releases, remember, that's hormones into the bloodstream. It lets the hormones travel to cells, other parts of the body, and that controls these hormones from our endocrine system. That is what's controlling our mood internally. Think about it that way. Our growth, development, the way our organs work, our metabolism, how we're processing food, reproduction. That's the endocrine system at work. So you've got your nervous system and all the nerves, but the endocrine system, think about it as your organs, and it's a hormone that's in your bloodstream, so it's affecting kind of your body. It's in your bloodstream all over. Where your nervous system, it can go to specific parts to create action, quick action, responses, run, whatever the case may be. So the endocrine system, when we look at, there's parts of it. We've got the pituitary gland, pineal gland, and thyroid gland that regulates, all of those together regulate metabolism, really. But that pituitary gland is responsible for releasing neurohormones related to fear, love, and stress. Why the pineal gland is important for like melatonin. Melatonin to help you sleep, but also it's called your circadian circadian rhythm, or that cycle regulation, and that is the time when you wake up. You have a circadian rhythm that your body needs to have a certain rhythm, the same time in bed every night, and you're creating these habits. Your body is always, your mind's always trying to create habits, and that rhythm is, and if you're not sleeping enough, or you're getting up at different times, like if you had to travel to Europe from America or somewhere else with this different time zone, why you kind of feel lethargic or sick or just not right for a few days, because your body's kind of, that circadian rhythm is trying to adjust to this new time zone. So it's that's your pineal gland, and actually they call it pineal gland because it kind of looks like, if you look in the picture there on the screen, it kind of looks like a pine cone. And that pineal gland is actually helps us control that circadian cycle of sleep and wakefulness by secreting melatonin at the right time of the day. So I can tell you there are a lot of studies too that won't go into it too much, but I highly recommend, if you like podcasts, there's Andrew Huberman, the Huberman podcast. He is a neurologist and ophthalmologist, I believe, out of Stanford, and he has an incredible podcast called the Huberman Podcast. And he talks about these research studies that if you find yourself kind of depressed or not in a great mood all the time, how important it is to get the sunlight, without your glasses blocking all the sunlight, but early in the morning, if you can get 30 to 45 minutes walking during the day or just preparing for the day, how much it will positively impact your mood. And also at night, very important thing is before you go to bed, that blue light from your cell phone really causes, it screws up your circadian rhythm. So you've got to put it away. If you can sleep with your cell phone somewhere else for at least 2 hours before you want to go to bed, before you want to enter that REM, that deep sleep, let's say that you want that to be at 11 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock, you need to get rid of that computer, get rid of your phone, and you need to allow your body to start adjusting. Instead of that blue light's a red light, actually, and that prepares your circadian rhythm to prepare to go to sleep, because it naturally increases the melatonin in your body that allows you to prepare to not only fall asleep, but to stay asleep whenever you go to bed. And then, of course, there's the thyroid gland on there. It's located in the front of the neck, just below, if you're a man, of course, Adam's apple, but that larynx. And it's kind of a butterfly shape. It has 2 lobes on either side of your trachea, your windpipe. And it plays a major role in your metabolism, growth, development of the human body. It also regulates, because it's constantly releasing a stream of course, thyroid hormones into your bloodstream. Again, there's the definition of neurotransmitter, a chemical that moves information from one nervous system cell. That may be a question on the test. That's why I put that in there again. But just understanding adrenal glands we're still in the endocrine system. So you remember that is, your organs and things like that. But adrenal glands, or a small gland, it's like a steroid. It makes steroid hormones called adrenaline and noradrenaline. And actually that adrenaline and noradrenaline, I shouldn't call it that because that's kind of the pharmaceutical name for it. It's really epinephrine is adrenaline. Those are the same thing. Epinephrine, adrenaline, same exact thing, but the technical term is epinephrine. And then norepinephrine is also called noradrenaline. So you just kind of realize, you see they're both the same thing. But epinephrine is a neurotransmitter and a hormone, but it acts mainly as a hormone. And it plays an important role in your fight or flight response. It is going to raise your heart rate, your blood pressure, but it's also used as a medication. If someone has really low and abnormally low blood pressure, then they're actually given epinephrine to raise their blood pressure. That's what, the little pills or whatever will raise the blood pressure to a normal level, because too low a blood pressure can be very harmful too. And then we have norepinephrine. And it's a neurotransmitter of the brain, but it changes the regulation of arousal, attention, cognitive function, stress reaction, anger, fight or flight response. That norepinephrine. Really, what it is when you look at what epinephrine and norepinephrine is, you've got epinephrine is your body stores a chemical, and it could be adrenaline. And then the noradrenaline or norepinephrine is when it's released, what it does. So it is going to be released, and that's where the fight or flight comes through with norepinephrine or noradrenaline. That's when it's released in your body. So it's stored until it's needed. And so when it's stored, it's called epinephrine. When it's released, it's called norepinephrine. Not on the test, but just important to kind of know the difference between that. And of course, anabolic steroids, didn't talk about that, but that's supplied in amounts of adrenal glands. That is naturally producing steroids, that help you build muscle mass, other type of things. It's, and not bad. Most people can't even take the synthetically produced steroids. Whenever, you're 40 and you start to get older, your body stops producing as much. And same with women, that we've got testosterone, and we've got these balance of female and male hormones that are in our body, and you have this natural amount, and it starts producing more or less of the other, which causes the changes in our body, our memory, so many other different factors as we age. So there's anti-aging medications are actually replacing the lost hormones in our body. So knowledge check activity. As a young child, James was bitten by a dog. Although he does not have clear memories of the event, as an adult, he's still afraid of dogs. Which part of the brain is responsible for his fear of dogs? Remember, where is this memory? Where is it kind of stored? You remember when I said something? What was the hijack? The amygdala hijacking. So it's kind of stored memories that comes out and creates this memory of this fearful experience. So that's the amygdala. So we're going to look at psychology or skill set, self-regulation. So executive living in your frontal lobe. So self-regulation, it's the ability to understand, manage your own behavior and your reactions or to feelings or things happening around you. That's an important thing to do. It wasn't in the slide, but it's just more important because self-regulation is not just what's happening around you. It's how your body's interpreting the events that are happening around you. And it allows you to self-regulate. It regulates and it processes. If you're healthy, you have a healthy self-awareness of why you do what you do, then you're going to be able to look at what's happening, and you're going to be able to identify what is a real fear versus a fake fear, something that you should not be scared of. If I talked about in the last video, I think roaches, it's something we probably shouldn't be fearful of, but it's maybe stored in the amygdala that maybe it happened to us or generations ago, that we still have this fear of something and we don't know why. It could be buried deep into our subconscious. So, having self-regulation, self-awareness includes being able to regulate the reactions to strong emotions, frustration, excitement, anger, embarrassment. It's being able to sit back, process that information, and then and that's our sympathetic, but be able to, you can actively and knowingly engage in that parasympathetic response to calm your system down, to realize that's really not a real fear. I'm reacting this way to this person today, and they're not the ones that hurt me. That happened with someone else, but yet I'm having this reaction that is because of a prior relationship, for instance. And it helps you by having great self-regulation, and that's where we get into emotional intelligence, being able to understand that and comprehend that information in the right way. So self-regulation, we talked a little bit about, it says from marshmallows to retirement funds. I want to show you just a quick video on it because we do have a little bit of time, but on managing yourself, managing impulses. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that marshmallow test.
What is this marshmallow test? Well, when you look at children and you look at all the different theories about what makes successful kids, you realize that almost all the theories are wrong because they haven't been verified. Like, for example, high IQ. You have a lot of high IQ people who become marginal members of society. And so what is the one psychological test that correlates with success in life? And I found out that it's the marshmallow test. You get kids and ask them, do you want a marshmallow now? Or 2 marshmallows a few hours from now? And the kids that want the marshmallow now tend to be those that want shortcuts, those that don't want to do the hard work. They want the quick kill. They grab that marshmallow. But the other ones say, no, wait a minute. If I wait 2 hours, I can get 2 marshmallows. I can hold out. There's a pot of gold waiting for me. They're not going to take the shortcut. And so you say to yourself, well, that's a test for kids. But then you track them decade by decade by decade, and you find that they are more successful, they have a lower divorce rate, higher income, higher status in society, that don't want that simple payoff now, but are going to delay gratification into the future. And so I realized that that's the key to success in life, not just science, but in life. Don't take the shortcuts.
But can it be taught?
Well, part of it is your personality that is formed when you're very young. Okay, let's be very clear about that. But I think that, yes, I think that, for example, it turns out that if you do the same thing with poor children and the same thing with middle-class children, it turns out that poor children will, in general, go for the quick kill because they know that things disappear real fast. If there's money in the house, it's gone in the future. If you can show people that there is a pot of gold out there, that yes, you hold out, you go to college, you'll learn the discipline, there's a pot of gold out there. You can learn to appreciate that fact. What we have in the brain that is different from animals is we understand time. We understand the future. Now we have an increased lifespan. We have all the luxury goods. Instead of yelling out the window, which is what my grandparents did to communicate, we have the internet. And so when you look at it the long term, decade for decade, you realize the enormous progress that we've made. We constantly daydream, we scheme, we plot. We constantly think about what could be. Now let's do an experiment. Go home tonight and teach your dog the concept of tomorrow. Try it. Teach your dog the concept of tomorrow, the next week, the next year, and you realize you can't. Animals live in the present, and that's what I think intelligence is. Intelligence is being able to map the future, simulate the future, and that's what we humans do that animals cannot. We constantly daydream. We constantly create worlds that don't exist, and to me, that's what intelligence is. Some people ask me, well, what is the meaning of life then? And I say to myself that if somebody gives you from up high the meaning of life, it's too easy. I mean, is that all? My attitude is that it's self-discovery. We have to reinvent ourselves, that we have to recreate ourselves, that the meaning of life is rediscovery.
So the really important thing to understand there too, and you think about, of course, when you're a child, if you have a harder time, and I've got to say that I think with technology today, we live in an instant world, swipe left, swipe right, whatever. You get what you want, immediate gratification with wanting things, being able to buy something on, online today and have it at your house tomorrow, and sometimes even the same day. We live in that world, and because of that, we are not delaying that gratification, and that is really, and only time will tell how that's going to transcend into personality and the way that people are, and what is the effect, the long-term negative effect from divorce rates and other type of things with that instant gratification. So you think about you're no longer a child. How can you really practice that? How can you improve that delayed gratification? Because it still shows statistically, if you can delay gratification, you're going to do better at work, you're going to do better in a marriage or relationship, you're going to do better and create more wealth or opportunities. So you're, of course, more likely going to be able to achieve those goals. So what you can do is, first off, realize it, set a goal first off. When you're in college, or taking courses, that there are going to be these instant needs, these desires, that to play a game or socialize with a friend, go to a party, things like that. And that's that immediate gratification. But if, someone with high IQ or someone wanting to work, IQ can be, and we'll talk about this more in chapter 9, but it's not set. You can improve it. And a big part of IQ is not just that generalized intelligence, it's emotional intelligence, regulation, motivation. That's why he said, the doctor on the video said that a lot of very high IQ people don't do well in a job because they're not motivated. He didn't say the motivation part, but that's really what they lack. So if you want to do well, if you want to change the course of your life, delay those things that aren't as important today. Trust me, you're not going to remember that game or what you did. It doesn't mean don't have fun, but make sure you schedule it out and take care of those important things in life that are going to benefit you long term. So we already talked about Walter Mischel and the marshmallow test, so we won't go over that again. But self-regulation is the ability to keep disruptive emotions and impulses in check and to think before acting, not letting something, bad things happen to all of us. Instead of immediately reacting, our first reaction, in social media, we see a pulse is to send, a post is to send another one because it upset us. And then all of a sudden it's triggering things and all of a sudden it blows up and now you no longer have a friend or whatever. Those kind of things happen. Self-regulation is, think about your actions before you do it. Just whenever something upsets you or is creating this event that happened is triggering something in you, stop and take a breath and just think about it a little bit and work on that. That's self-regulation. Setting goals, managing your impulses. That is really the correlation between really success and failure. So we've got, just to wrap this up, we're at an hour. A cool cognitive systems, is really, when you hear about cool cognitive system, it's just for complex spatiotemporal and episodic, representation really is what it is of your thoughts. So it means that you're processing the information taking in without that emotional attachment or emotional involvement where, and that they kind of refer to, I'll put that in there as the no system, being able to, that cool cognitive system says, I'm not going to allow emotion to really interfere with my decision making and my reaction. Let me think about this. Where a hot emotional system, that's with a high level of arousal, it's a hot state. That's why they call it that, where you have a lot of interest. It could be emotion, activity. It could be if someone's talking about, let's say it's a presidential election and you really hate the person someone else is talking about and they love them, you immediately are going to respond because it's something you care about. It's of interest. It may create a hot emotion. And they're called that because you actually can feel your blood pressure rising. It makes your muscles tense up. It makes you feel more energetic. It's a hot emotion. And then we talk about selective attention. That's being able to force yourself to focus on what you want to focus on. So if you're talking to a friend, for instance, and you're in a crowded place, not being distracted with all those noises and things going around you, or a squirrel, it's focusing on that conversation. That's being able to have selective attention. And that's something you may have to practice. And because if you don't, it can cause a lot of problems, especially if you think about selective attention. If you're not good at processing that, or if you're too good at processing selective attention where you're hyper-focused. I have a problem with this. And think about it when you're driving and you're hyper-focused on what exit you're going to take, then you may have some blind spots and miss this crazy driver to your left. That's when that hyper-focus or hyper-attention can create a problem too, because you're not aware of the other situation, other things going on around you. So it's good to have selective attention, but not hyper-focused attention. So, and then of course, cognitive appraisal, and really that's just an assessment of your emotional situation, where you evaluate how that affect, whatever that event is, you're evaluating that cognitive reappraisal, you're evaluating it, saying if this happens, then this is how it's going to impact me. How that, you're assessing that emotional attachment to how it could affect you negatively, positively, and that's what's going to trigger your motivation and action to do something or not do something about it. So it's based on how your brain is interpreting data. And if you're interpreting it the wrong way, then of course your behavior is going to be the wrong behavior and you're going to generate a bad or negative result. That's what cognitive reappraisal is. It's, it's just an approach of all the different factors in interpretation of data. So I'm not going to get into this food for thought, but just a couple of knowledge check questions. A gland in the brain that helps regulate bottom rhythms and sleep cycle is called what? That's a pineal, right? The pineal gland. Pineal gland, a lot of people call it. Which of the following best explains the function of the thyroid gland? So read those. The thyroid, if someone has a hyperactive thyroid, what happens? A lot of times they gain weight. Their body doesn't regulate. That metabolism is slower, and it's storing that in body fat, and it's not metabolizing that food quickly. So that's with that thyroid. And then after you read, of course, chapter 2 and watch this video. So again, read chapter 2. Here are some of the things that we kind of talk about, the different parts of the nervous system, important parts of a neuron, how they operate and communicate with each other, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, 3 methods to understand structures of the brain. So this is basically what we discussed today in today's class. And with our next chapter, Chapter 3, we're going to get into human development and talk about nature and nurture. So it's a very interesting part, and thank you for paying attention. Make sure you take notes.